Clips for Coursework. Introductory video. What is generalist practice? This clip will introduce the viewer to the concept of generalist practice and will also provide information on each of the individuals who participated in the Clips for Coursework project.
In generalist social work, which is what most beginning students learn, we learn about 8 sizes of systems with which a generalist practitioner might work. And they are individual, family, group, community, the natural systems, and then the people-made systems, organization, social institution, nation, and international level. So I thought I would look back at my career and think through whether I've worked with all of these systems, and I found out that I have, every single one of them.
Working with individuals and families.
I started my career working with individuals in the State Public Child Welfare Agency, which is where most people start.
I work at the Academy Charter High School in South Belmar, New Jersey, and I primarily function in the capacity of counselor. I have done some child study team work if they need me to fill in. The population is 90% African American. Well, I won't say African American, I will say 90% black. Many of our students are Haitian and many are African American. I don't know exactly the dividing line, but I deal with them on an as needed basis as problems arise, whether they arise with the teachers, lunchroom problems, whatever the problem may be. And certainly the problems that they have with their peers. And I try to intervene before it becomes out of control. If they have problems at home, they know that they can bring that to me also. If they have problems in the community. Whatever it is, I will try to find a solution. And I consider that the solution-based model is what I use.
The majority of the people I work with are women who are in recovery from addiction, and I do group and individual type work with them. I do other types of work with just general evaluations and mental health issues.
I am an outpatient counselor. I'm a part-time counselor here. I work with adults, couples, adolescents, families, women's issues. So women, yeah.
I work in the Young People's Program, and we serve children aged 3 to 12 and their families. And the program was established in 1998 following the Columbine incident because the agency started to get a lot of calls and intakes for children. So they started this program because there was a need in the community and a concern.
And prior to beginning to teach at Kane, I worked for probably about 20 years in direct service with clients in a variety of types of settings, dealing with diverse issues in primarily outpatient departments of psychiatry in hospital settings. And I've worked, many of those clients were dealing with having inadequate resources in terms of housing, income, dealing with major medical problems, psychiatric problems like mental illness, personality disorders. And quite a number back in the 80s were dealing with HIV/AIDS. So they were dealing with quite a number of things. Also recent immigrants to the United States.
working with groups.
I never did work with groups other than as an educator until last year when I took a sabbatical and I had an opportunity to work with a program called Caring for You, Caring for Me. This is a training session for caregivers of the elderly, and what an education this experience was. I set up a group, and the first thing that you run into when you work with groups is the hardest thing when working with groups is setting up the group. We had these caregivers of the elderly who were themselves elderly and ill. So you had to, number one, convince them that they had to get over their guilt so that they could come to the group. Number two, you had to get them there, and this agency was able to provide transportation. They also provided food, which is another good way to get people to come and do things. And then they had support staff who sat at the table with me who knew all of the clients since I was a stranger. The group was bilingual. So we had seniors, mostly African American, who were caregivers for older, sicker seniors. And we had another group of seniors who were Latino, some of whom spoke no English. So the group became bilingual because it had to. We were able to look at the perspective of the African American families and the Latino families on what care is, what your responsibilities are, what the guilt issues are. That was really fascinating.
Working with communities.
My agency is a community agency, works the service the community in general, but it's more focused to the Latino community that has language barriers. You know, due to the language barrier, we need to have some service for them. So we focus a lot into that. And I actually got involved in finding services for this agency and also developing a women resource center, specifically for women, Hispanic women. So that was a big task at the beginning.
Okay, so the next level is community, and this was the field that I chose to enter, and I got my degree in community organizing, and to my good fortune, my field instructor was involved with a local library and helping the library to write a proposal for a library outreach program. Well, since she was doing the writing, she said, you've got to hire an MSW social worker to direct this thing. So I was probably the only MSW social worker ever to be in a job in a library that required one. The library is an ideal setting for a social worker to do community work. You know, one of the things social workers face is the stigma that people attach to us and to the things that we do and to our client population. But everyone loves libraries. So if you're working in a library, whatever you're doing, no one feels ashamed to take that service from you. So that was wonderful. And I think for people who do community work, as we think about that kind of work, you usually do not do that in a traditional social work agency. But should a student go out or a practitioner go out, don't feel that you stop doing social work. You're very much doing social work. You're just in a non-social work setting.
Working with organizations.
So moving on from the community level, we go to the organizational level, and I've done a tremendous amount of work with organizations, most of it as a consultant, which is one of the roles that I still continue to play. I do a lot of evaluation research studies and needs assessments for agencies. Last summer, I worked with an agency that had to get a procedures manual together if they wanted to keep their state certification. We helped them write it. I've done needs assessments. I've done program development work. various kinds of things. So I use my research skills here as a practitioner in working with organizations. And very often when you're working with an organization, although they're paying your salary, you have to make recommendations to them that they ought to change what they're doing, which can be challenging. And you have to find ways to do that positively.
Academy Charter High School was founded 6 years ago by a group of teachers who were teaching in an urban environment in a district that was considered to be a failing school district, and thought that perhaps we could put together a school with some of our experiences and education that would better serve the students that we enjoy teaching.
Working with social institutions.
Our next level is social institution, and I've worked with a number of what I would call our larger social institutions in the state. The State Public Child Welfare Agency, where I began my career, I've also worked for them as a research consultant, looking at their database to find out how many children are abused and neglected, in what ways, in what communities, doing other descriptive studies, and doing evaluations of various services that they provide. Last summer, I began some work with the Department of Human Services, which is the larger unit above them, looking at a very important new issue, which is the issue of grandparents now becoming caregivers for their grandchildren. And I did a series of focus groups with grandparents, many in their 70s, many with serious health problems, to find out what their most important issues were, and then to take those issues back to the people making the policies.
Well, we are a huge agency actually in New Jersey, and big enough that I think probably a lot of the numbers of what we do would probably dazzle most people. Our budget in the Department of Health and Senior Services represents 70%. Our senior services budget represents 70% of the overall budget of the entire department. We do things like almost 300,000 meals, congregate meals, and we serve 1.4 million people over the age of 60 and approximately 800,000 caregivers. And those are only some of the formal statistics. So we're a very large department. We're responsible. We are the State Unit on Aging for the federal government. We administer all of the Older Americans Act dollars, state dollars, Medicaid funds, and we have endless numbers of programs, supportive programs, waiver programs, state plan services for the aging and for their caregivers.
Working at the national level.
I work for the American Cancer Society, and American Cancer Society is a nationwide organization, and specifically I work for the American Cancer Society New Jersey Chinese Unit. And American Cancer Society New Jersey Chinese Unit is a nonprofit organization with a firm commitment to assist American Cancer Society in its mission to promote cancer research, cancer education, and cancer patient and family services. And we hold a strong interest in reaching out to the Chinese American community. And when people are diagnosed with cancer, they are facing the isolation and emotional distress, and this may due by the language barrier and cultural disorientation. So we try to work with them and to fight the cancer.
National level, I was almost about to say I never did this, but I have. And I did it in two different ways. My job after I left the library was to do a study of New Jersey social services for the legislature. And while we were doing that, a new president was elected, and some of the folks from our local department immediately got sent to Washington for 3 months. And while they were down there, I was invited down to talk about my study and what I had found about the organization and delivery of services. It's the only study of its kind that I know of that was ever done. So I had input in a beginning the beginning of a presidential administration into social services, which was really exciting.
Working at the international level.
International, I worked at one point as a consultant for an organization called Church Women United. They work all over the world and deal with women's issues around the world. Things like the clitorectomies that are practiced on women in some countries, helping women in countries where they don't have rights to achieve some level of rights, education, and services. So I found out that I really have worked at all those levels, and I want to say to students out there, if you do these things, don't say, I'm not a social worker anymore. You definitely are. This is all social work.
Values and ethics. Service. Social workers' primary goal is to help people in need and to address social problems.
You know, at one time they only give me $5,000 to take care of the elderly in the whole county. And that was a situation that, how I solved that. I only hired an older lady that wanted to work with the elderly, had patience, and she would put volunteer hours. And we will pay her gasoline, and she will visit this elderly at home. But with $5,000, we could not give her a salary. So we use it to reimburse her mileage. But that was about it. And when she got sick, we didn't have anyone to do it. So it becomes a difficult situation to solve.
Social justice. Social workers challenge social injustice.
The Hispanic Women's Center was first funded for 1 year. And at the end of the year, the funding was taken away and then they approved the program to be permanent, but was no money to fund it. So you are caught in that situation that you need to solve. And eventually, after taking an activist approach, I actually got buses with women and took them to Trenton and discussed with them, with the legislators, the Hispanic women's situation. And through that, after many discussion and visiting and contacting politicians, we were able to get permanent funding.
Dignity and worth of the person. Social workers respect the inherent dignity and worth of the person.
Well, the basic ethics that I come to is that every client that comes in is a human being and usually hurting, but deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. As though, even though their background, their presentation, if they're hostile, confused, using harsh language, there's something underneath that I need to overlook that, even though, in our society, certainly these behaviors and whatever aren't considered acceptable. I have to look beyond that.
Self-determination. Social workers promote clients' socially responsible self-determination.
By providing services, I think it's necessary to let each patient have self-determination. They need to know, sometimes they want to know which hospital and which doctor, what kind of treatment they are going to have. But we ask them to have a self-determination.
I think the key value in community organizing is self-determination, which all of social work talks about, and empowerment. But if you take a locality development approach to community organizing, a Peace Corps kind of approach to your work, then you're going to start with the issues that people bring to you. And you're going to help them to learn how to deal with those issues by educating, by teaching skills, by finding strengths and building on strengths. And it's amazing as people begin to work on their issues that they begin to feel empowered no matter how disempowered they may feel when you begin.
Confidentiality. Social workers should protect the confidentiality of all information obtained in the course of professional service, except for compelling professional reasons.
And the other one is very important, is confidentiality, because we try to be trustworthy and to respect their privacy.
Separating personal and professional values. Social workers should be aware of any conflicts between personal and professional values and deal with them responsibly.
I have got to be very sensitive to the diverse values that people come with. I've had to recognize and accept that my values are no more than my values. And I try to make sure that particularly students understand that that's what your family taught you. It doesn't mean that your values or mine are any better than anyone else's. All it means is that they're different.
My values play a big part in my work, but I also know that I can't impose my values on other people.
Competence. Social workers practice within their areas of competence and develop and enhance their professional expertise.
Ethically, I have to be careful not to assume that I can help somebody that is beyond the scope of my abilities, experience, or whatever, and be able to refer them. So that's part of the ethical issue. And you know, we all know the confidentiality and maintaining proper supervision for myself to provide the client with the best care. And again, with our computer age and our cell phones and the type of world that we live in, making ethics ethics is even more complicated. There's a lot to keep up on. There's constant learning of you know, new laws and technology.
There are many other ethical principles to which social workers must subscribe. The Code of Ethics of the National Association of Social Workers is a guide to these ethical principles to which all social workers should adhere. You can access the full text of this document through the Brooks-Cole Curriculum Connector. Aging. Caregiving.
Well, several major things that we're doing through governor's initiatives here in New Jersey. We have a very proactive governor when it comes to senior things, and our commissioner. We have what's going to be called New Jersey Caring for Caregivers Initiative. This is an extension of things that we do for caregivers. Actually, New Jersey, interestingly, is one of 9 states that represents over half the number of seniors in the United States. And of that number, with all of the caregivers, 64% of whatever the number of caregivers there are, all of those individuals work. So what we're in the process of doing is coming up with better ways to provide support kinds of programs. One of those is a caregiving kinds of initiatives. So there'll be a new one in New Jersey, an extension. We'll cover all 21 counties here. Those are some of the things we do. We also have respite programs. Respite programs, probably with President Reagan's recent death in the mind of everybody. What does that mean? That means relief for family members, caregivers, loved ones who have a prolonged period in which to assist and aid and support people with chronic disease.
Dealing with diverse needs.
Because in order to administer services to such massive numbers of people, in this case seniors and caregivers, you're talking about millions and millions of people, again, and we're projecting 70 million people. So how do you come up with services that can take care of you and me and your neighbor and your mother and your aunt, all of whom, as I said before, may not choose the same lifestyle or choose support in the same way, or frankly, be found at whatever stage in their life with a certain number of people around them. Your children are there, your children aren't there. You have no children. You have children who are disabled. All kinds of things can happen. So what I think we've learned is that we need to put groundwork in place in order to build on. The second thing that was probably done that was very important was to, outside of making a Department of Senior Services, was what's called New Jersey EASE. It stands for Easy Access Single Entry. It's basically an 800 number, but it's actually a connection across our entire network in the 21 counties in New Jersey.
Special issues facing elderly individuals who speak no English.
And they said, well, it's a lot of programs for the elderly. Send them there. They go one day and they don't return because they feel out of place, and at that age, they don't want to be in a place that no one talk to them, or they don't understand what is going on, so they prefer to stay shut in their house. And that's one of the biggest problem in the elderly community. They stay by themselves. And if they try to talk, they get very upset because no one understands. And I can give you an example. It was this fellow, he was very old, and his language was Portuguese. And we could understand them because Spanish have some similarities. And he felt very sick one day and called us. By the time we got there, he got so upset, and the police came and took them to jail because he was disturbing the peace, and he was like screaming and yelling, and he was upset and they said, well, he speaks Spanish, so go and see what he wants. The fellow was having a heart attack, but he didn't know how to express, and being so sick, although he could relate to English, somehow to English, at the moment of stress, he could not. He just kept talking in Portuguese. And they were saying, well, we have to send him to a mental institution. And he didn't need to go to a mental institution. He needed to express what he was going through at that moment. And if we hadn't got there, by the time we got there, he had gone, so we had to go to find him where they sent him, because they said, no, he needed to go to a mental institution. He's completely crazy. So the elderly faces a lot, the Hispanic and other elderly with different language face a lot of problems. So that's another situation that is very challenging, because where you find funding or help for them.
Use of volunteers.
You know, at one time they only give me $5,000 to take care of the elderly in the whole county. And that was a situation that, how I solved that. I only hired an older lady that wanted to work with the elderly, had patience, and she will put volunteer hours. And we will pay her gasoline, and she will visit this elderly at home. But with $5,000, we could not give her a salary. So we use it to reimburse her mileage. But that was about it. And when she got sick, we didn't have anyone to do it. So it becomes a difficult situation to solve.
Meals on Wheels.
Greatest successes in service provision, certainly our food programs. I think Meals on Wheels cannot be underrated. The good thing about Meals is that program has evolved over the last 20, 30 years from kind of dropping food off at the door to you have to make a contact with that person. And what we're finding out now is that it's not so much about the food, although it's important to have the food, but it's more important that that human contact's there. So there's a tremendous success.
Creating consumer-driven services.
You're looking at changing the way doctors perhaps give advice to families and to seniors when a critical incident happens that may lay them low, and say, well, maybe it's time for mom now. Maybe you won't be able to handle this. Maybe that's not such good advice. Maybe that doesn't even take into account what the person really wants. Maybe that's more of a convenience for the children than the parent, or the husband or wife even, or the sister or brother, because maybe they're aging and they have other issues. And then get down to the nurses and the social workers, the people that do assessments on these individuals. The system has been very designed for, we know what you need, we tell you what you need, and we'll assess you and see what box you fit in, and then we'll put you in that box. What long-term care rebalancing about is really about consumer choice, and about saying, we're going to allow you to walk through the grocery store of home and community-based services. Tell us, what you feel like having, what you think you could have. Now that's going to be a balance, because it's not all going to be about them saying, oh, I want that, because maybe you think that's right for you, but maybe a social work assessment or a nursing assessment, just the knowledge base of it and what we know about, would say that's probably not going to work out, or it may only work out for a month or two, but it's not going to work out 6 months from now. So that is a whole, I hate this term, paradigm shift, but I think it's even more than a paradigm shift. It's a total change in perspective. It's going to require a change in curriculum. It's going to require a change in standard operating procedure. It's going to require changing policies. It's going to require legislation. So it's a huge nut to crack, but it's something that we're going to need to do, and something that there's the will of the people for, and there's going to be more people wanting that, because the people coming up underneath boomers, those who are younger than myself, those who are younger than those younger, these are individuals who have made very individualistic decisions for themselves all along their lifespan. So their values on what they want and how they're going to select that are much more personal than the generation that are in nursing homes now, and, if you will, are our grandparents and parents, who are very accepting much more accepting. So again, that's going to create a tremendous change in the system and a tremendous change in perspective. And I would say not so much on their end, on our end, on the provider end, because we are used to a top-down system. And this is a consumer-driven up system that needs to be supported across the board.
Substance abuse. Use of theory.
Okay, the theories that I employ come from my schooling, whether it be looking at genetics, whether it be looking at maturational, whether it be looking at behavioral, whether it be looking at Maslow's theory or Piaget or Erickson's levels of development, whatever fits, whatever comes to mind. And the thing is, it's not like you're always thinking, well, I'm using Erickson or Ericksonian therapy or his ideas through the stages of life. It just comes because you're trained and you read, and that's really what comes to mind. Freud, whether it be ego, id, superego, whatever theory comes to mind that will work for this individual or this group, I'm going to use it. And it's based on learning in college.
I'd have to say I rely on the client-centered approach, humanistic, everything I've ever learned. I do come from an addiction type family systems. And I usually view the client that came in from probably a family where there's dysfunction. And I want to identify, what does this client need right now? What's their most urgent need?
Primarily cognitive behavioral therapy. That's the most accessible, I think, for most people in terms of, changing behavior, looking at behavioral change, understanding what they're doing, why it's not working so well, or identifying that, coming to identify that, and then in turn attempting to revamp behaviors to improve functioning and to do better in the world. But I'm also, I use some transactional analysis around relationships, reality therapy. Systems is a huge piece of what I do, because I don't look at any individual as an individual. I look at them as a part of a system in which they exist. And I mean, that's, to me, the only way. I never look at an adolescent. I mean, you can talk about an identified patient, but it's really a family. And sometimes, far beyond that. Certainly culture. That's a whole nother piece.
Treatment modalities.
The majority of the work that I do is one-on-one individual sessions. I do groups of women. I have done some family sessions. I think the family sessions are the most challenging. They provide a counselor or therapist a lot of information when you see the interactions. I think people are more honest in individual sessions. So I usually try to do a combination. A lot of people aren't ready for group, and they really don't want to reveal themselves, share their pain, their shame, or whatever among other people. So it may take some time for an individual to gradually get prepared for that. But actually sharing in a group setting is probably the most beneficial, and most of the women that I work with are involved with 12-step work or other types of support, self-help, women helping women. The benefits are substantial.
Well, initially, I think one of the strategies that I use is confrontation. You know, they are people that don't expect a counselor to confront them with what they're doing. So we work on finding out why, the need for it, and we look at history. We look at when they were children, what happened. We work through the maturational cycle to see why they came to the point, because some people begin using drugs at 9 or 10, others begin at 26. So you want to know what was the impetus that caused them to begin at different ages in their lives, or different stages, life stages. So I work with them with regard to that, and I work with each person, even in a group. I know them individually, I know their case files, and I almost make it an individual group process. And I think that's what creates a level of success.
Certainly in terms of understanding, and transactional analysis really incorporates, you know, Freudian models of ego, superego, and id. So it uses them, and it I think communicates better to most people. In terms of understanding how they are communicating with whom, the things that push their buttons, why, and then threading that back through time and space to childhood, to, you know, for adolescence, of course, childhood isn't that far away, but to relationships with parents. So, you know, starting to identify those threads and issues, and then helping them, you know, having the raised consciousness then in turn deal with them and deal with their situations. Reality therapy, I mean, people really, I have found, are enormously influenced by their milieu, by their family, by a single person. And they have a lot of issue with distortions at that point. So when they come into you, they're really wondering if they're losing their minds. You know, wait a minute, I mean, I think that, I mean, they have a lot of cognitive dissonance. So just a lot of internal, you know, activity and turmoil, trying to figure out, like, is that the reality, what he told me it is, or what she said, or what they're telling me, or, you know, like, how come I'm so confused by all this? So we do a lot of sorting out with that, and reality, people need a lot of support, and that's, you know, I didn't even write that down, which I should have. I mean, the heart of everything you're doing is about the supportive relationship. It's only within that that you build the trust, that somebody can say to you, wait a minute, is it me, or is it them, or can even tell you what their situation is outside of the therapy room, so that you can help them sort out what makes sense and what doesn't, what's real and what is not, and what's in someone else's interest as opposed to what's in theirs. So it really is an important part of what I do.
Working with women.
The majority of the people I work with are women who are in recovery from addiction. And I do group and individual type work with them. There's many substances that these women are affected by. and those create complications in themselves. Most of them are young mothers. Parenting and the ability to get, you know, to treatment, having childcare and all those issues, they're really important for the recovery. And I see the recovery for young women with children to be very complicated.
Self-awareness.
The notion of knowing yourself, of knowing your vulnerabilities, of knowing your strengths, your values. You know, I don't think there's anything more important than the value of respect in the therapeutic relationship, which involves, you know, really knowledge and allowing your client to instruct you about who they are. So it's a kind of humility that is really a prerequisite, I think, to doing a good job. And the more you know about yourself, the more honest you can be with yourself about yourself. Is this the stuff you want? Okay. And, you know, and really never being all that satisfied with yourself. I think we have to always be questioning what we're doing. I think that's the role a supervisor takes. When you have a good supervisory relationship, then you're opening up, you're talking about your mistakes, you're talking about your not mistakes, and, you know, that's a shaping relationship as well. But it's only meaningful, any of this stuff is only meaningful to the extent to which you're honest. So that's important.
School social work in a charter school. Charter schools.
Charter schools in New Jersey can't use any criteria for selection. It has to be a general lottery. So we do recruitment throughout the sending area and recruit the students to come. What we find is we get a pure cross-section of the students who would normally attend Asbury Park High School. Same special education population, same issues, student issues that we're dealing with, same economic and academic diversity.
Philosophy.
The school was designed to be a college preparatory school, but we understood that the students were going to be coming in with a variety of issues that had to be dealt with in order for us to be successful with that. Academically, they're coming in several grade levels below where they should be, but socially they're dealing with all sorts of issues. By anyone's definition, they would be certainly considered at-risk students. They're economically disadvantaged. They're coming from single-parent homes, often living with family members other than their mother or their father. A variety of issues that come, violence in the area, violence in the homes, children of abuse. So we wanted to structure the school to support the students in all areas so that they could be academically successful.
Mentoring program.
And one of the things that we've done to do that is set up a mentoring program so that all children come into school, get to know the staff members, and then pick a staff member who's going to be their faculty mentor while they're there. They can change during their 4 years if they want to, but often students will stay with the same faculty mentor. The mentor meets with them for a formal period every Wednesday for 45 minutes in the middle of the school day. The entire school day comes to a stop, and every child and staff member goes to mentoring. But also we start off every day with what we call community, which means the entire school community stands around the outside of the gymnasium, and we do our morning announcements, we take attendance there, but most importantly, it's a time where the mentors touch base with their 10 students in their mentoring group and get to know that everything's okay, and they can troubleshoot and identify if there's any problems right there. We have 200 students in the entire school, grades 9 through 12. We have 1.6% social worker, so they're serving those 200 students. What we do is we use the mentors. We don't say that they're social workers. We tell them you're not to do social work, but rather to be ears and eyes for us and to identify on a 1 to 10 ratio if there's any problems that they see, so that the social workers, the guidance counselors, and the administration can then troubleshoot and help the students. So we're hoping that we're getting attention to the problems a little sooner than normally would happen in a traditional caseload, which could be one counselor to 200, 250 students.
Well, if there is a child that is having a lot of problem with whatever, whether it be schoolwork, whether it be interaction with peers, and I do know they have a mentor because each one does, I may go to the mentor and discuss the child with them and come to some idea as to how we're going to improve behavior, improve them scholastically, whatever they need. And it is nice having the mentor program because it's easy then to work toward betterment.
A family approach.
The charter school was designed pretty much as a family approach. If you talk to the students who are there, they see it as a large family with all the pluses and the minuses that go along with that. The responsibility of being part of a family member, but also they see the support and attention, and that when they make a mistake, we see it as a mistake that has consequences, and then we get up and we go from there, and it's not held against them. To that end, they are taught to understand and to believe intrinsically that they can be successful and they can go to college and they can make themselves into whatever they want to be. And that's just the tentative belief and the climate of the entire school from day one all the way through.
What I do is I try to get them on the phone, try to talk to them, try to encourage them to come in. And that works sometimes sending a letter. I'll do anything that I possibly can. In fact, I'll even go out to the house if absolutely necessary.
Dealing with school violence.
All schools are required by the federal government to have a zero tolerance towards violence, and we fulfill that, but you don't want to wait until you get to a violent incident to then have to kick the student out for a year or the other requirements that we're obligated to do. We found that there's several things that will reduce the incidences of violence. One is having a small learning community. The fact that there's only 200 students in the school makes it a very intimate environment where everyone knows everyone else. That reduces violence. Also, it's been proven by research that if the students have at least one adult that they feel a sense of identity with and support from, that increases not only their academic and emotional stability, but also reduces their discipline infractions and violence infractions. And so our mentoring program, we feel, helps that. We've also put in place a peer mediation program, so the students are trained to mediate out their own minor infractions. We have a merit-to-merit policy, so that there's a constant reward and consequences. We really enforce that life is a series of decisions, and when you make decisions, then there can be good things that come with it, or there can be consequences. And our merit-to-merit policy supports that. And under the unfortunate circumstances when a violent act occurs, the children also know that it's not permitted at all, and if there's even a fight that takes place on school property or on the school bus, that we go past the normal suspensions, but we also will file criminal charges and hold them accountable legally, so that they know that there's just no place for that in the school environment.
Graduation.
there's a lot of successes over the years, but I think it all comes to fruition. That last week before graduation, the students have come back from their senior class trip, and it's interesting what we find with the school is we didn't anticipate the social aspects that the children wouldn't want to graduate. Every high schooler wants to graduate, and one of the unforeseen effects of the program that was created was that it's such a family supportive atmosphere that the kids are afraid to go. And the spring of their senior year, we have to convince them that really they're prepared, and they wouldn't be leaving if they weren't prepared. But that final week, when they've overcome their fear and they're ready to go, and they walk up for graduation, and every one of them is crying as they walk up the aisle, and it's a really good feeling to see the changes and how much they've grown.
There have been many great successes. There has been one child that comes to mind, a male, that used to run around the school screaming and hollering, and I really never thought that we could get him to focus long enough to succeed at anything. And with my help, with the teacher's cooperation, with the disciplinarian, we all worked together to get him to follow the rules of the school. And today, he graduated. It took him 5 years. He was on the 5-year plan. But it took him 5 years, but he graduated. He's working at a nursing home. He's doing very well, and they love him there. And I think he is one of our greatest successes.
Understanding and dealing with violence. Social workers are often asked to intervene in situations where violence has occurred. This can involve domestic violence, school violence, or criminal violence. In this video, practitioners discuss their understanding of domestic violence and school violence and present the strategies they have used to address these two issues. Defining domestic violence.
Under the umbrella, I would include certainly any type of physical abuse. I would also include sexual abuse and emotional abuse, which is generally happening concurrently. I mean, if somebody's being physically abused and beaten, I have no reason to think that they're not being emotionally abused also. And that would mean symptoms or signs of that would include constant criticism, belittling of the person, threatening types of behavior, forcing them into situations where they feel they have no choice but to depend on you, intimidating people through the use of fear, instilling fear in them. So I would include anything that causes a person to feel that they are at risk to be harmed, whether it's physical, emotional, all of the above, sexual.
Understanding domestic violence.
That definitely ties in with why some people stay. It's very scary. I think there are self-esteem issues involved in this. Some people grow up in situations where they're told, you're nothing, you'll never be anything. You can't possibly live without me. And some people come to believe that. And we might sit here and have an intellectual, philosophical discussion about it, but these are real people's lives, you know, with this. And it is not, I think change is very, very difficult. I think leaving, I'm assuming leaving an abusive situation has got to be very difficult also. You don't know what's out there. And sometimes the women leave and they're found, and we hear about them on Eyewitness News. So it's important to know that people do leave, but I don't think that that's the minority. I don't think that's the majority of people. Okay, in my experience in working with domestic violence situations, I've discovered the hard way that more often than not it's the female who's being beaten, although I have had a few cases of men who were being physically abused and emotionally by the spouse or partner. But again, in my earlier days, I used to wonder, well, if someone's beating on you, why don't you just go? And the response that I have gotten over the years is, but I love him. And I've learned it's hard to reason with a person because love is an emotion, it's a feeling. And it's easy for me to sit someplace and tell a client, you know, this is just no good, you need to go. But the other piece of it I learned, again, the hard way, is that very often these women are relying on these men to pay their bills. This could be the baby's daddy or the baby's father, so whoever it is buying the Pampers, keeping a roof over their head, helping to enhance, if you will, whatever they might be receiving, if they're receiving any public funds or monies. And they become not only obligated, but so dependent on these men that it's not easy to leave. Some of them, the only way they get away is through death, unfortunately. Another reason that helps to explain, not that we like it, but another reality is that you have a significant percentage of people who have been abused, who grew up in abusive households and settings. They might have been abused themselves. So if you grow up in a household where you see someone beating on someone physically or emotionally, that's what you learn. And I think as children very often do, we say, well, when I grow up, I'm not going to be like mommy or daddy. I'm not going to do this. But unfortunately, it's not always that simple. And I think children are basically groomed by watching the behavior. They watch how adults relate to one another.
I can usually identify domestic violence even if they don't offer that information through some assessments and through information that is, you know, general. There's certain typical questions and behaviors, and after talking to them a while, they start realizing that they either have been or are in a relationship where there's, you know, either verbal abuse or, you know, accelerating physical abuse happening. And through gentle education, because they're a very sensitive population, and there is a lot of tendency for mental health people as well to re-victimize them and to judge them. They feel very judged.
Treating domestic violence.
I probably give them hotline numbers just in case, because I don't know, they could be going home to a dangerous situation, so I give them hotline numbers. You know, obviously the 911, so the emergency situations. And I have to tell them that leaving that kind of relationship can be very dangerous. So I kind of prepare them for the worst in a calm manner, because I don't know. I don't know how severe their particular situation is.
So what we're always trying to do to be effective practitioners is to intervene and essentially try to stop the transmission of dysfunctional behavior from moving on to the next generation. We're trying to stop it at a particular generation. And I think that for people to be able to change is a very, very difficult thing. And I think it's easy sometimes for practitioners to say, well, if that were me. And what I generally tell my students is, you know, don't say what you would never do. Never is a long time. And that other old time saying, there but for the grace of God go I. No one really knows what's going on behind closed doors of a family. It's not until they're on the 6 o'clock news that everyone says, oh, such a peaceful, loving, quiet family. but that's when you find out what types of abuse were actually taking place. So I think it's important, again, it speaks to values, to recognize that your values as a professional may not be the same as your clients, and what works for you may not work for them. And as professionals, sometimes we're involved in relationships and situations that our clients wouldn't even think about tolerating. So it's important, again, not to be judgmental, I guess, with this, and to try to understand, accept clients where they are at, and allow them whatever time and space they need to make change. But if minor children's lives are at stake here, then you will have to intervene, and you won't have time to sit and let's try to figure this out. It's a question of safety and risk for children. You can't force an adult to change something, but you have a duty, we all have a duty to protect children.
Understanding and working with school violence.
All schools are required by the federal government to have a zero tolerance towards violence, and we fulfill that. But you don't want to wait until you get to a violent incident to then have to kick the student out for a year, or the other requirements that we're obligated to do. We found that there's several things that will reduce the incidences of violence. One is having a small learning community. The fact that there's only 200 students in the school makes it a very intimate environment where everyone knows everyone else. That reduces violence. Also, it's been proven by research that if the students have at least one adult that they feel a sense of identity with and support from, that increases not only their academic and emotional stability, but also reduces their discipline infractions and violence infractions. And so our mentoring program, we feel, helps that. We've also put in place a peer mediation program, so the students are trained to mediate out their own minor infractions. We have a merit-to-merit policy, so that there's a constant reward and consequences. We really enforce that life is a series of decisions, and when you make decisions, then there can be good things that come with it, or there can be consequences. And our merit-to-merit policy supports that. And under the unfortunate circumstances when a violent act occurs, the children also know that it's not permitted at all, and if there's even a fight that takes place on school property or on the school bus, that we go past the normal suspensions, but we also will file criminal charges and hold them accountable legally, so that they know that there's just no place for that in the school environment.
I think they face issues of school violence, but on a different level, maybe like bullying. Either they are the bully or they are being bullied, or they themselves are just become angry and act out in school. So those kinds of issues are there, and we have to deal with them. And we do work with the schools, around certain cases, to develop strategies to help children cope with their anger and their acting out behavior, and help children to become empowered to deal with bullying and things like that.
And we have gone to schools to discuss with the principals what's going on, because the family comes and complains to us and they don't know what to do. So we usually work with the schools and the principals. And in order to, I had a case in which the principal had to put a guard outside the school, waiting for the child to come in, and then make sure that the other group was not harassing this child. And they were high school children, but they still can hurt each other very badly. And the families get devastated because they are afraid to send the children to school. And we work with those families and the schools. We bring also programs and diversity programs in order for have the students have a better understanding of the other cultural groups and the other communities, other families. So in order for the student to understand that, we have to bring those programs into the schools. And the schools have been very good We have worked with the Human Relations Commission to bring more programs and help the principals and the school community to deal with all the violent issues in the schools, in the school system.
September 11th, World Trade Center disaster. One of the major responsibilities of social workers and other helping professionals is to provide services at times of crisis. The National Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics states that a social worker's primary goal is to help people in need and to address social problems. The code goes on to say that social workers elevate service to others above self-interest. Social workers draw on their knowledge, values, and skills to help people in need and to address social problems. Social workers are encouraged to volunteer some portion of their professional skills with no expectation of significant financial return. The events of September 11th offered social workers and other human service professionals an opportunity to act on these principles. Informal responses. Crisis intervention following the World Trade Center disaster.
The best place for me to start would be, for this discussion, would be where I was on September 11th. I was in the middle of teaching a class of undergraduate students at another college. And by the time we heard about the second plane hitting, and we noticed, there are no planes in the sky, and we started seeing fighter jets flying sideways. And I had never seen this before. And we were alerted by the president that all the bridges, everything were closed, nobody could get in or out. And at the time, I had a number of students who were from other countries, who were from other states, who were frightened, particularly when you have freshmen. And what happened was I was in the middle of a class of students who were going to be graduating that year. And the other social worker on campus who worked with me was unable to get across the bridge to even get to school. So essentially we had myself, I was the only social worker on campus. We had people in the counseling center, but the students, some of them were fearful. One was crying and they're saying, what can we do? We can't handle it. I said, we're social workers, we can handle everything. This is what you said, you wanted to be a social worker? Well, here we are. We don't always have the opportunity to plan for these things. And so I sent them out to attend to other students. We found some students crumpled up in the hallway crying. One of them had a parent in the World Trade Building working, so on a high floor. Everyone in this building, all of us, anyone, any place in the continental United States is at risk for being killed. And we've never had to consider that. I mean, I've heard stories of colleagues who had a former client or a client's husband or boyfriend threatened to kill them, but this is a different ball game at this point. So I feel like we are now a population at risk. We're with everybody else who's at risk for a variety of things.
Formal responses. Crisis intervention following the World Trade Center disaster.
I ended up volunteering to work over at the Family Center, which was in Jersey City, actually on the location where immigrants used to come through to get on the train after they'd been come to Ellis Island. It was actually a fascinating place. And one of the reasons they chose it is you could look directly across the, you would just come out of the building and look directly across, and that was where the Twin Towers had been. So, and it was eerie, if I can say that, in that the Statue of Liberty, if you looked to the right, you could see the Statue of Liberty, and you looked across and you just, you saw the smoke and the whatever for so long. And victims' families. and in some cases survivors, quite a few survivors, could come there. And it was like a small city, and there were multiple trailers and stations inside and out with every, start with FEMA and go all the way down every possible social service agency that you can imagine. And families just came in there, poured in there every day. And you would go up and meet them. You'd get assigned a family, and you'd have a clipboard, and you'd take them back to a table, and you'd find out, what the situation was. We had everyone from people who had lost their jobs as a result of the fact that the entire downtown was burned out, to survivors, children, wives, husbands, sisters, brothers, mothers, fathers. Just killer stuff to sit across from these families. In the beginning, they're just stunned beyond belief. Just it's surreal. I think it's still surreal for us as Americans, let alone that. And when you were sitting with people as a social worker or nurse, and I worked hand in hand with many of those people, those assessment skills that you learn, where are they? Are they even hearing you? Drawing them out, all those kinds of things that you do with families in crisis. And you'd find yourself sitting there and taking a lot of deep breaths and trying to work with them and help them and do what you need to do for them, and then helping yourself. And the model that they had there was an interdisciplinary team effort where you started with an intake, just like you would do. An intake, your name, rank, serial number, who are you, what's the situation, checked off your sheet, you got your chart, if you will, on a clipboard. What do you need? You did an assessment, and then you took them to the Red Cross, to FEMA, to Social Security, to whatever they needed. And you stayed there with them. That was the key. You stayed there with them. You didn't leave them there to sit there and wait. You stayed with them the entire time, from when they hit the door to when they left. I think it called every professional to draw out every ounce of professionalism, every ounce of everything you'd ever learned, every interpersonal skill you'd ever practiced on others prior, and a lot of your own intestinal fortitude to do it. Some people did it and were able to come back and come back again, and other people were not able to do it and come back again. I don't think burned out, just overwhelmed. But the good part about it, and I guess that goes back to the helping profession, the privilege to be able to be there as a professional, to use your profession in a way at a time when our country was probably the most compromised it's ever been, physically and emotionally, in recent memory, probably since World War II, where we felt attacked. Not to take away from Vietnam or anything, but this was attacked on our own soil. I think drew out of people, took them to places. But I think every professional would say they were buoyed up beyond belief by the individuals, the victims, and went back in and went back and went back. I think it got easier. Wasn't easier on the people, but got easier on us. And that's probably the real message of the profession. Stick with it, because some days it could really, you feel like you don't have anything else you can draw on. But come back in the next morning and you'll find it. You can draw on it again and again and again. And there were just groups of these people that came from all over the country. It was just amazing. And you'd go in and get a bite to eat or something. And where are you from? Oh, from California. We're from Iowa. We're from Idaho. We're from Wisconsin. We're from Montana. It was just amazing. It's just amazing. Everybody there for the same reason. And then living up in northern New Jersey, everybody knew somebody. And it was funny, when I came down here to work, it was like I wouldn't say it was like it hadn't happened, but it was like it hadn't happened. You see, up there, every town, you go to a restaurant and they'd have these people's pictures out, and in town, 22 people, 32 people, whatever. My kids lived in Hoboken. They lost, hundreds of people. We all knew somebody. These really were our neighbors and our friends and our relatives. Where when you came down here, it was like it happened and everybody felt terrible, but it didn't feel like it felt up there.
Well, trauma, traumatic loss, sudden loss, anger. I worked with families and children, so young children and grief, how to explain grief to young, how to explain death to young children, how to support families that are very fragile, and those issues being very, very sensitive to how fragile people are when sudden traumatic death occurs.
Social work in a post-September 11th society.
But I think we have an obligation to keep abreast and keep up to date with some of the information and the knowledge. All information is not knowledge, so we have to kind of separate the two to be aware of what are some of the policies that are being put into place, some of the laws, for example, like the Patriot Act. What are the actual implications of this? I feel it's important for students to even know what the Patriot Act stands for, what those letters actually mean. If everyone has prejudices, I don't believe that means we have to act on them. So being aware of how are we feeling about the people who have been identified as quote-unquote terrorists. And as I indicated, I'm currently conducting research into not so much what's the impact on the victims or clients, but I'm more focused at this point on what is the impact on social work professionals, the practitioners, the educators, and students. What is it that our students need to be able to get out there and be effective? I think the other issue has to do with the question of post-traumatic stress disorder. And there are some speculation in this burgeoning field of terrorism now about the general population's impact by this, because so many people watched very dramatic graphic images daily, weekly, and for many months after September 11th. And that's actually a sign, can be a sign, a condition of PTSD that people have witnessed. So we have millions of people in this country have witnessed the same thing over and over and over. I think that recognizing that we're in the same boat as everyone else in terms, it's not something that we are somehow immune because we're social workers. No, not this time. Maybe in the past, but not right now. For, and that we use all of our basic social work skills, educator, being an advocate, being anything that we can do to facilitate with this, being a mediator sometimes between clients who are attempting to secure services and blocks that they're encountering or barriers. I think that we need to be as proactive as we can.
Maintaining a non-judgmental attitude.
We've got to adhere to the code of ethics. And part of that, one of the questions is, how fair and non-judgmental can we be to someone who's been identified as a terrorist, or to someone who supports some of the aims of people who are committing terrorist acts in the United States? I guess the last key issue that I'm realizing we have to deal with now is helping, assisting, not feeding into discrimination against people who share some of the characteristics of some of the people who were identified as terrorists on 9/11, either by religion and or complexion or country of origin, and even values. I mean, we do have people here who don't necessarily share the same values, and they have a right to that. They don't have a right to kill anyone, but they do have a right to different values. So I'm finding that helping students to learn the balance, and again, boundary issues, these are where your rights end and their rights actually begin. So those are the key issues that I see.